Ever buy a painting that follows you? Tonight, one's on a deadly road trip. In the road virus heads north. Richard Kennel wasn't frightened when he first saw the picture at the yard sale in Rosewood. He was fascinated by it and he felt he had good luck to find something which might be very special. But fright? No. It didn't occur to him until later. Not until it was too late, as he might have written in one of his own numbingly successful novels, that he had felt much the same way about certain illegal drugs as a young man. He had gone down to Boston to participate in a Penn New England conference titled "The Thread of the Threat of Popularity." You could count on Penn to come up with such subjects. Kendall had found it was actually sort of comforting. He drove the 260 miles from Derry rather than flying because he'd come to a plot impasse on his latest book and wanted some quiet time to work it out. At the conference, he sat on a panel where people should have known better. People who should have known better asked him where he got his ideas and if he ever scared himself. He left the city by way of Tobin Bridge, which then got on Route 1. He never took the turnpike when he was trying to work out problems. The turnpike lulled him into a state that was like dreamless waking sleep. It was restful, but not very creative. The stop and go traffic on the coast road, however, acted like grit inside an oyster. It created a fair amount of mental activity and sometimes even a pearl. Not, he supposed that his critics would use that word. In an issue of Esquire last year, Bradley Simons had begun his review of Nightmare City this way. Richard Kennel, who writes like Jeffrey Dahmer cooks, has a suffering a fresh bout of projectile vomiting. He has titled his most recent mass of ejecta Nightmare City. Route I took him through Revere, Malden, Everett, and up the coast to Newburyport. Beyond Newburyport, and just south of the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border, was a tidy little town of Rosewood. A mile or so beyond the town center, he saw an array of cheap-looking goods spread out on the lawn of two-story cape. Propped against an avocado-colored electric stove was a sign. What? Reading yard sale. Cars were parked on both sides of the road. Oh, both sides of the road, creating one of those bottlenecks which travelers unaffected by the yard sale mystique curse their way through. Kendall liked yard sales, particularly the boxes of old books you sometimes found at them. He drove through the bottleneck, parked his Audi at the head of the line of cars pointed towards Maine and New Hampshire, and then walked back. A dozen or so people were circulating on the littered front lawn of the blue and gray Cape Cod. A large television stood to the left of the cement walk, its feet planted on four paper ashtrays that were doing absolutely nothing to protect the lawn. On top was a sign reading, "Make an offer, you might be surprised." An electric cord, augmented by an extension, mailed back from the TV, and through the open front door, a fat woman sat in a lawn chair before it, shaded by an umbrella with Cesano printed on the colorful scalloped flaps. There was a card table beside her with a cigar box, a pad of paper, and another hand-lettered sign on it. This sign read, "All sales cash, all sales final." The TV was on, turned to an afternoon soap opera where two beautiful young people looked on the verge of having deeply unsafe sex. The fat woman glanced at Kendall, then back at the TV. She looked at it for a moment and then looked back at him again. This time her mouth was slightly sprung. Ah, Kendall thought, looking around for the liquor box filled with paperbacks that was sure to be here someplace. A fan. He didn't see any paperbacks, but he saw the picture leaning against an ironing board held in place by a couple plastic laundry baskets, and his breath stopped in his throat. He wanted it at once. He walked over with a casualness that felt exaggerated and dropped to one knee in front of it. The painting was a watercolor, and technically very good. Kendall didn't care about that. Technique didn't interest him, a fact the critics of his own work had duly noted. What he liked in works of art was content, and the more unsettling the better. The picture scored high in that department. He knelt between two laundry baskets which had been filled with a jumble of small appliances, and let his fingers slip over the glass facing of the picture. He glanced around briefly, looking for others like it, and saw none, only the usual yard sale art collection of little Bo, Pete, praying hands, and gambling dogs. He looked back at the framed watercolor, and in his mind was already moving his suitcase into the back seat of the Audi so he could slip the picture comfortably into the trunk. It showed a young man behind the wheel of a muscle car, maybe a Grand Am, maybe a GTX, something with a T-top anyway, crossing the Tobin Bridge at sunset. The top was off, turning the black car into a half-assed convertible. The young man's left arm was cocked on the door, his right wrist was draped casually over the wheel. Behind him, the sky was a bruise-colored mass of yellows and grays, streaked with veins of pink. The young man had lank blond hair that spilled over his low forehead. He was grinning, and his parted teeth revealed teeth that were not teeth at all, but fangs. Or maybe they're filed to points, Kendall thought. Maybe he's supposed to be a cannibal. He liked that, liked the idea of a cannibal crossing the Tobin Bridge at sunset, in a Grand Dam. He knew what most of the audience at the pin panel discussion would have thought. Oh yes, great picture for Richard Kinnell. He probably wants it for inspiration. A feather to tickle his tired old gorge and one more fit of projectile vomiting, but most of those folks were ignoramuses, at least as far as his work went. And what was more, they treasured their ignorance, cosseted it the way people inexplicably treasured and cosseted those stupid, mean-spirited little dogs that yapped at visitors and sometimes bit the crippled boy's ankles. He hadn't been attracted to this painting because he wrote horror stories. He wrote horror stories because he was attracted to things like this painting. His fans sent him stuff, pictures mostly, and he threw most of them away, not because they were bad art, but because they were tiresome and predictable. One fan from Omaha had sent him a little ceramic sculpture of a screaming, horrified monkey's head poking out of a refrigerator door, however, and that one he kept. It was unskillfully executed, but there was an unexpected juxtaposition there that it lit up his dials. This painting had some of the same quality, but it was even better, much better. As he was reaching for it, wanting to pick it up right now, the second wanting to tuck it under his arm and proclaim his intentions, a voice spoke behind him. Aren't you Richard Kittle? He jumped, then turned. The fat woman was standing directly behind him, blotting out most of the immediate landscape. She had put on fresh lipstick before approaching, and now her mouth had transformed into a bleeding grin. Yes, I am, he said, smiling back. His eyes dropped to the picture. I should have known you'd go right to that, she said, simpering. It's so you. It is, isn't it? He said, smiled his best celebrity smile. How much would you need for it? $45. I'll be honest with you. I started it at 70, but nobody likes it, so now it's marked down. If you come back tomorrow, you can probably have it for 30. The Semper had grown to frightening proportions. Kendall could see the little gray spit buds in the dimples of the corners of her stretched mouth. I don't think I want to take that chance. I'll write you a check right now. Semper continued to stretch. The woman now looked like a grotesque John Waters parody. Divine does Shirley Temple. I'm really not supposed to take checks, but all right, she said, her tone that of a teenage girl finally consenting to have sex with her boyfriend. Only, while you have your pen out, could you write an autograph for my daughter? Her name's Michelle. What a beautiful name, Kendall said automatically. He took the picture and followed the fat woman back to the card table. On the TV next to it, lustful young people had been temporarily displaced by an elderly woman gobbling bran flakes. Michelle reads all your books. Where in the world do you get all those crazy ideas? I don't know. They just come to me. Isn't that amazing? The yard sales minder's name was Judy Dement, and she lived in a house next door. When Kendall asked if she knew who the artist happened to be, she said she certainly did. Bobby Hastings had done it, and Bobby Hastings was the reason she was selling off the Hastings things. That's the only painting he didn't burn. Poor Iris, she's the one I really feel sorry for. I don't think George cared much, really, and I know he didn't understand why she wants to sell the house. She rolled her eyes in a large, sweaty face. The old can you imagine that look. She took Kendall's check when he tore off, then gave him the pad where she had written down all the items she sold and the prices she obtained for them. Just make it out to Michelle, she said. Pretty please for sugar on it. The Semper reappeared like an old acquaintance she hoped was dead. Uh-huh, Kendall said, and wrote his standard thanks for being a fan message. He didn't have to watch his hands or even think about it anymore, not after 25 years of writing autographs. Tell me about the picture and the Hastingses. Judy DeMint folded her pudgy hands in the manner of a woman about to recite a favorite story. Bobby was just 23 when he killed himself this spring. Can you believe that? He was a tortured genius type, you know, but still living at home. Her eyes rolled again and again, asking Kendall if he could imagine. He must have had 70, 80 paintings, plus all his sketchbooks. Down in the basement they were. She pointed her chin at a Cape Cod, and then looked at the picture of the fiendish young man driving across Tobin Bridge at sunset. Iris, that's Bobby's mother, said most of them were bad. Lots of worse than this. Stuff that'll curl your hair. She lowered her voice in a whisper, glancing at a woman who was looking at the Hastings. Mismatched silverware and a pretty good collection of old McDonald's plastic glasses and a Honey I Shrunk the Kids motif. Most of them had sex stuff in them. Oh no, Kendall said. He did the worst ones after he got on drugs, she continued. After he was dead, he hung himself down in the basement where he used to paint. They found over 100 of those little bottles they sell crack cocaine in. Aren't drugs awful, Mr. Kendall? They sure are. Anyway, I guess he finally just got to the end of his rope, no pun intended. He took all his sketches and paintings out in the backyard, except for that one, I guess, and burned them. Then he hung himself down in the basement. He pinned a note to his shirt and said, "I can't stand what's happening to me. Isn't that awful, Mr. Kennel? Isn't that just the awfulest thing you ever heard?" "Yes," Kennel said, sincerely enough. "It's just about is. Like I say, I think George would go right on living in the house if he'd had his druthers." She took a sheet of paper with Michelle's autograph on it, held it up next to Kennel's check, and she shook her head, as if the similarity of the signatures amazed her. "But men are different." "Are they?" "Oh, yes, much less sensitive. By the end of his life, Bobby Hastings was skin and bone, dirty all the time, you could smell him. And he wore the same T-shirt day in and day out. It had a picture of Led Zeppelin on it. His eyes were red, had scraggle on his cheeks that you couldn't quite call a beard, and his pimples were coming back, like he was a teenager again. But she loved him. His mother's love sees past all those things." A woman who had been looking at the silverware and glasses came over with a set of Star Wars placemats. Miss Dement took $5 for them and wrote the sale carefully down on her pad below, 1 dozen assorted pot holders and hot pads. Then turned back to Kendall. They went out to Arizona to stay with Iris's folks. I know George is looking for work out there in Flagstaff. He's a draftsman, but I don't know if he's found any yet. If he has, I suppose we might not ever see him again here in Rosewood. She marked out all the stuff she wanted to sell, Iris did, and told me I could keep 20% from the trouble. I'll send a check for the rest. There won't be much, she sighed. The picture is great. Yeah, too bad he burned the rest, but because most of the other stuff is your standard yard sale crap. Pardon my French. What's that? Kendall had turned the picture around. There was a length of dino tape pasted to the back. A tide, I think. What does it say? He grabbed the picture by the sides and held it up so he could read it for himself. This put the picture at eye level to him, and he studied it eagerly, once again taken by the simple-minded weirdness of the subject. Kid behind the wheel of a muscle car. Kid with a nasty, knowing grin that revealed the foul points of an even nastier set of teeth. It fits, he thought. If ever a title fitted a painting, this one does. The road virus heads north. The road virus heads north. I never noticed that when my boys were lugging stuff out. It's tied, do you think? Must be. Bill couldn't take his eyes off the blond kid's grin. "I know something," the grin said. "I know something you never will." "Well, I guess you'll have to believe the fellow who did this was high on drugs," she said, sounding upset. Authentically upset, Kimmel thought. No wonder he'd kill himself and break his mama's heart. "I gotta be heading north myself," he tucked in his picture under his arm. "Thanks for Mr. Kennel?" "Yes. Can I see your driver's license?" She apparently found nothing ironic or even amusing in this request. "I ought to write the number on the back of your check." Kennel put the picture down so he could dig for his wallet. "Sure, you bet." The woman who bought the Star Wars placemat paused on her way back to the car to watch some of the soap opera playing on the lawn TV. Now she glanced at the picture which Kendall had propped up against his shins. Ugh, who'd want an ugly little thing like that? I think about it every time I turn the lights out. What's wrong with that? Kendall's Aunt Trudy lives in Wells, which is about 6 miles north of Maine, New Hampshire border. Kendall pulled off at the exit, which circled the bright green Wells water tower, the one with the comic sign on it, "Keep Maine green, bring money," in letters 4 feet high, and 5 minutes later he was turning into the driveway of her neat little salt box house. No TV sinking into the lawn on paper ashtrays here, only Aunt Trudy's amiable masses of flowers. Kendall needed to pee and hadn't wanted to take care of that in a roadside road stop when he could come here, but he also wanted an update on all the family gossip. Aunt Trudy retailed the best. She was to gossip what the bars is to deli. Also, of course, he wanted to show her his new acquisition. She came out to meet him, gave him a hug, and covered his face with her patented little birdie kisses, the ones that made him shiver all over as a kid. "Want to see something? It'll blow your pantyhose off." "What a charming thought," Aunt Trudy said, clasping her elbows in her palms, looking at him with amusement. He opened the trunk, took out his new picture. It affected her all right, but not in the way he had expected. The color fell out of her face in a sheet he had never seen anything quite like in his entire life. "It's horrible," she said in a tight, controlled voice. "I hate it. I suppose I could see what attracted you to it, Richie, but what you play at, it does for real. Put it back in your trunk like a good boy, and when you get to Saco River, why don't you pull over in the breakdown lane and throw it in?" He gaped at her. Aunt Trudy's lips were pressed tightly together to stop them trembling, and now her long, thin hands were not just clasping her elbows, but clutching them, as if to keep her from flying away. At that moment she looked not 61, but 91. "Auntie?" Kendall spoke tentatively, not sure what's going on here. "Auntie, what's wrong?" "That." she said, unlocking her right hand and pointing at the picture. I'm surprised you don't feel it more strongly yourself, an imaginative guy like you. Well, he felt something. Obviously he had, or he never would have unlimited his checkbook in the first place. Aunt Trudy was feeling something else, though, or something more. He turned the picture around so he could see it. He had been holding it out for her, so the side with the dinotype title faced him, and he looked at it again. What he saw hit him in the chest and belly like a 1-2 punch. The picture had changed. That was punch number one. Not much, but it had clearly changed. The young man's smile was wider, revealing more of those filed cannibal teeth. His eyes were squinted down more, too, giving his face a look which was more knowing, and nastier than ever. The degree of a smile, the vista of sharpened teeth widened slightly. The tilt and squint of the eyes, all pretty subjective stuff. A person could be mistaken about things like that, and of course he hadn't really studied the painting before buying it. Also, there had been the distraction of Mr. Mint, who had probably talked the cock off a brass monkey. But there was also punch number two, and that wasn't subjective. In the darkness of Audie's trunk, the blond young man had turned his left arm, the one cocked on the door, so that Kendall could now see a tattoo which had been hidden before. It was vine wrapped, dagger with a bloody tip. Below it were the words, below it were words. Kendall could make out "death before," and he supposed you didn't have to be a big best-selling novelist to figure out the word that was still hidden. Death before dishonor was, after all, just the sort of thing a hoodoo traveling man like this was apt to have on his arm. And an ace of spades or a pot plant on the other one, Kendall thought. You hate it, don't you, Annie? Yes, she said, and now he saw an even more amazing thing. She had turned away from him, pretending to look out at the street, which was dozing and deserted in the hot afternoon sunlight, so he wouldn't have to look at the picture. In fact, Auntie loathes it. Now put it away and come on into the house. I bet you need to use the bathroom. Aunt Trudy recovered her savoir faire almost as soon as the watercolor was back in the trunk. They talked about Kendall's mother, Pasadena, his sister, Baton Rouge, and his ex-wife, Sally, Nassau. Sally was a space case who ran an animal shelter out of a double-wide trailer and published two newsletters each month. Survivors were filled with astral info on supposedly true tales of the spirit world. Visitors contained the reports of people who had close encounters with space aliens. Kendall no longer went to fan conventions but specialized in fantasy and horror. One Sally in a lifetime, he sometimes told people, was enough. When Aunt Judy walked him back out to the car, it was 4:30, and he turned down the obligatory dinner invitation. I can get most of the way back to Derry in daylight if I leave now. Okay, and I'm sorry I was so mean about your picture. Of course, you like it. You always liked your oddities. It just hit me the wrong way. That awful face, as if we were looking at him and he was looking right back. Kendall grinned and kissed the tip of her nose. You got quite an imagination yourself, sweetheart. Of course, it runs in the family. Are you sure you don't want to use the facility again before you go? He shook his head. That's not why I stop anyway. Not really. Oh, why do you? He grinned. Because you know who's been naughty and who's being nice, and you're not afraid to share what you know. Go on, get going, she said, pushing at his shoulder, but clearly pleased. If I were you, I'd want to get home quick. I wouldn't want that nasty guy riding along behind me in the dark, even in the trunk. I mean, did you see his teeth? Ugh. He got on the turnpike, trading scenery for speed, and made it as far as the gray service area before deciding to have another look at the picture. Some of his aunt's unease had transmitted itself to him like a germ, but he didn't think that was really the problem. The problem was his perception that the picture had changed. The service area featured the usual gourmet chow burgers by Roy Rogers, comes by TCBY, and had small littered picnic and dog walking area at the rear. Kendall parked next to the van with Missouri plates, drew in deep breath, let it out. He'd driven to Boston in order to kill some plot gremlins in the new book, which was pretty ironic. He spent the ride down working out what he'd say on the panel if certain tough questions were tossed at him, but none had been. Once they'd found out he didn't know where he got his ideas, and yes, he did sometimes scare himself, they only wanted to know how you got an agent. And now, heading back, he couldn't think of anything but the damn picture. Had it changed? If it had, if the blond kid's arm had moved enough so he, Kendall, could read a tattoo which was partially hidden before, then he could write a column for one of Sally's magazines. Hell, a four-part series. If, on the other hand, it wasn't changing, then what? He was suffering a hallucination, having a breakdown. That was crap. His life was pretty much in order, and he felt good. Had, anyway, until his fascination with the picture had begun to waver into something else, something darker. Oh, fuck. You just saw it the first time, he said out loud as he got out of the car. Well, maybe. It wouldn't be the first time his head screwed with his perceptions. That was also part of what he did. Sometimes his imagination got a little, well, feisty, Kendall said, and opened the trunk. He took the picture out of the trunk and looked at it, and it was during the space of the 10 seconds when he looked at it without remembering to breathe that he became authentically afraid. The thing afraid the way you were afraid of a small dry rattle in the bushes, afraid the way you were when you saw an insect that could probably sting you if you provoked it. The blond driver was grinning insanely at him now. Yes, at him. Kendall was sure of it. Those were filed cannibal teeth exploded all the way to the gum lines. His eyes simultaneously glared and laughed. And the Tobin Bridge was gone. So was the Boston skyline. So was the sunset. It was almost dark in the painting now, the car and its wild rider illuminated by a single street lamp that ran a buttery glow across the road in the car's chrome. It looked to Kendall as if the car, he was pretty sure it was a Grand Am, was on the edge of a small town on Route 1, and he was pretty sure he knew what town it was. He had driven through it himself only a few hours ago. Rosewood, he muttered. That's Rosewood, I'm pretty sure. Rory's Virus was heading north all right, coming up Route 1 just as he had. The blonde's left arm was still cocked out the window, but it had rotated enough back towards its original position so that Kendall could no longer see the tattoo. But he knew it was there, didn't he? Yes, you bet. The blonde kid looked like a Metallica fan who escaped from a mental asylum for the criminally insane. Jesus, Kendall whispered, and the words seemed to come from someplace else, not just from him. The strength suddenly ran out of his body, ran out like water from a bucket with a hole in the bottom, and he sat down heavily on the curb, separating the parking lot from the dog walking zone. He suddenly understood this was the truth he'd missed in all his fictions. This is how people really reacted when they came face to face with something that made no rational sense. You felt as if you were bleeding to death only inside your head. No wonder the guy who painted it killed himself, he croaked, still staring at the picture, at the ferocious grin, at the eyes were both shrewd and stupid. There was a note pinned to his shirt, Mr. Mint had said. I can't stand what's happening to me. Isn't that awful, Mr. Kinnell? Yes, it was awful, all right. Really awful. He got up, gripping the picture by its top, and then strode across the dog walking area. He kept his eyes trained strictly in front of him, looking for canine landmines. He did not look down at the picture. His legs felt trembly and untrustworthy, but they seemed to support him all right. Just ahead, close to the belt of trees at the rear of the service area, was a pretty young thing in white shorts and a red halter. She was walking a cocker spaniel. She began to smile at Kendall, then saw something in his face that straightened her lips. Out in a hurry. She headed left and fast. The cocker didn't want to go that fast, so she dragged it, coughing in her wake. The scrubby pines behind the service area sloped down a boggy area that stank of plant and animal decomposition. The carpet of pine needles was a road litter fallout zone. Burger wrappers, paper soft drink cups, TCB napkins, beer cans, empty wine cooler bottles, cigarette butts. He saw a used condom lying like a dead snail next to a torn pair of panties with the word Tuesday stitched on them in cursive burly girl script. Now that he was here, he chanced another look down at the picture. He steeled himself for further changes, even for the possibility that the painting would be in motion, like a movie in a frame, but there was none. There didn't have to be, Kendall realized. The blond kid's face was enough. The stone crazy grin, those pointed teeth. The face said, Hey, old man, guess what? I'm done fucking with civilization. I'm a representative of the real Generation X. The next millennium is tight right here behind the wheel of this fine, high-stepping machine. Aunt Trudy's initial reaction to the painting had been to advise Kennedy he should throw it in the Seiko river. Auntie had been right. The Seiko was now almost 20 minutes behind him, but this'll do, he said. I think it'll do just fine. He raised the picture over his head like a guy holding up some kind of sports trophy for the post-game photographers, and then heaved it down the slope. It flipped over twice, the frame catching winks of hazy late-day sun, and struck a tree. The glass facing shattered. The picture fell to the ground and slid down the dry, carpeted slope as if down a chute. It landed in the bog, one corner of the frame protruding from a thick stand of reeds. Otherwise, there was nothing visible but the strew of broken glass, and Kennel thought that went very well with the rest of the litter. He turned and went back to his car, already picking up the mental trowel. He would wall this incident off in his own special niche, he thought, and it occurred to him that it was probably what most people did when they ran into stuff like this. Liars and wannabes, or maybe in this case they were wannasees, wrote up their fantasies for publications like Survivors and called them truth, who then those who blundered into authentic occult phenomena kept their mouths shut and you use those trials. Because when cracks like this appeared in your life, you had to do something about them. If you didn't, they were apt to widen, and sooner or later, everything would fall in. Kendall glanced up and saw the pretty young thing watching him apprehensively for what she probably hoped was a safe distance. When she saw him looking at her, she turned around and started towards the restaurant building, once more dragging the cocker spaniel behind her and trying to keep as much sway out of her hips as possible. You think I'm crazy, don't you, pretty girl? Kendall thought. He saw as he left the trunk lid open. It's gaping like a mouth. He slammed it shut. You and half the fiction reading population in America, I guess. But I'm not crazy. Absolutely, I just made a little mistake, that's all. Stopping at a yard sale I should have passed up. Anyone could have done it. You could have done it. That picture? What picture? Richard Kenner asked the hot summer evening and tried on a smile. I don't see any picture. He slid behind the wheel of his Audi and started the engine. He looked at the fuel gauge and saw it had dropped under half. He was going to need gas before he got home, but he thought he'd fill the tank a little further up the line. Right now, all he wanted to do was put a belt of miles, as thick as one as possible, between him and the discarded painting. Once outside the city limits of Derry, Kansas Street becomes Kansas Road. As it approaches the incorporate town limits, an area that is actually the countryside, it becomes Kansas Lane. Not long after Kansas Lane passes between two fieldstone posts, tar gives way to gravel. What is one of Derry's busiest town streets, 8 miles east of here, has become a driveway leading up a shallow hill, and on moonlit summer nights it glimmers like something out of an Alfred Noyes poem. At the top of the hill stands an angular, handsome barn board structure with reflectorized windows, a stable that's actually a garage, and a satellite dish tilted at the stars. A waggish reporter from the Dairy News once called it the house that Gore built, not meaning the Vice President of the United States. Richard Kennel simply called it home, and he parked in front of it that night with a sense of weary satisfaction. He felt as if he had lived through a week's worth of time since getting up at the Boston Harbor Hotel that morning at 9 o'clock. No more yard sales, he thought, looking at the moon. No more yard sales ever. Amen, he said, and started towards the house. He probably should stick the car in the garage, but to hell with it. What he wanted right now was a drink, a light meal, something microwavable, and then sleep. Preferably the kind without dreams. He couldn't wait to get this day behind him. He stuck his key in the lock, turned it, and punched 3817 to silence the warning beep from the burglar alarm panel. He turned on the front hall light, stepped through the door, pushed it shut behind him, began to turn, saw what was on the wall where his collection of framed book covers had been just 2 days ago, and screamed. In his head, he screamed. Nothing actually came out of his mouth, but a harsh exhalation of air. He heard a thump and a tuneless little jingle as his keys fell out of his relaxing hand and dropped to the carpet. Between his feet, the road Virus headed north was no longer in the pucker brush behind the gray turnpike service area. It was mounted on his entry wall. It had changed yet again. The car was now parked in the driveway of the yard sale yard. Goods were still spread out everywhere, glassware and furniture and ceramic knickknacks, gaudy dogs smoking pipes, bare-assed toddlers winking fish, but now they gleamed beneath the light of the same skull-faced moon that rode in the sky above Kendall's house. His TV was still there too, and it was still on, casting its own pallid radiance onto the grass. And what lay in front of it, next to an overturned lawn chair, Judy Dement, was on her back, and she was no longer all there. After a moment, Kendall saw the rest. It was on the ironing board, dead eyes glowing, like 50-cent pieces in the moonlight. Grand Am's tail lights were a blur of red-pink watercolor paint. It was Kendall's first look at the car's back deck. Written across it in Old English letters were three words: the road virus. Makes perfect sense, Kendall thought numbly. Not him, his car. Except for a guy like this, there's probably not much difference. This isn't happening, he whispered, except it was. Maybe it wouldn't have happened to someone a little less open to such things, but it was happening. And as he stared at the painting, he found himself remembering the little sign on Judy Dement's table. All sales cash, it had said, although she'd taken his check, only adding his driver's license ID number for safety's sake. And it had something else too. All sales final. Kendall walked past the picture and into the living room. He felt like a stranger inside his own body, and he sensed part of his mind groping for the trowel he had used earlier. He seemed to have misplaced it. He turned on the TV, and then the Toshiba satellite tuner which sat on top of it. He tuned to V14, and all the time he could feel the picture out there in the hall, pushing at the back of his head. The picture had somehow beaten him here. Must have known a shortcut, Kendall said, and laughed. He hadn't been able to see much of the blonde in this version of the picture, but there had been a blur behind the wheel which Kendall assumed had been him. The road virus had finished his business in Rosewood. It was time to move north. Next stop. He brought a heavy steel door down on that thought, cutting it off before he could see all of it. After all, I could still be imagining all this, he told the empty living room. Instead of comforting, the hoarse, shaky quality of his voice frightened him even more. This could be, but he couldn't finish. All that came to him was an old song belted out in the pseudo-hip style of early 50s Sinatra. This could be the start of something big. The tune oozing from the TV stereo speakers wasn't Sinatra but Paul Simon, arranged for strings. The white computer type on the blue screen said, "Welcome to New England Newswire." There were order instructions below this, but Kendall didn't have to read them. He was a Newswire junkie and knew the drill by heart. He dialed, punching his MasterCard number, then 508. "You have ordered Newswire for," slight pause, "Central and Northern Massachusetts," the robot voice said. "Thank you very," click. Kendall dropped the phone back into the cradle and stood back at the New England Newswire log, snapping his fingers nervously. "Come on, come on, come on." The screen flickered then, and the blue background became green. Words began scrolling up, something about a house fire in Taunton. This was followed by the latest on a dog racing scandal, then tonight's weather, clear and mild. Kendall was starting to relax. Kendall was starting to relax, starting to wonder if he'd really seen what he thought he'd seen on the entryway wall, or if it had been a bunch of travel-induced fatigue when the TV beeped shrilly and the words "Breaking News" appeared. He stood watching the cap scroll up. A Rosewoman woman has been brutally murdered while doing a favor for an absent friend. 38-year-old Judith Dement was silently hacked to death on the lawn of her neighbor's house, where she'd been conducting a yard sale. No screams were heard, and Miss Dement was not found until 8 o'clock. When a neighbor across the street came over to complain about loud television noise, the neighbor, David Grade, said that Miss Dement had been decapitated. Her head was on the ironing board. "It was the most awful thing I have ever seen in my life," Graves said, as he heard no signs of a struggle, only the TV, and shortly before finding the body, a large, loud car, possibly equipped with glass-packed muffler, accelerating from the vicinity along Route 1. Speculation that this vehicle might have belonged to. Except that wasn't speculation, that was a simple fact. Breathing hard, not quite panting, Kendall hurried back into the entryway. The picture was still there, but it had changed once more. Now it showed two glaring white circles, headlights, with the dark shape of the car hulking behind them. "He's on the move again," Cal thought, and Aunt Trudy was on top of his mind now. Sweet Aunt Trudy, who knew who had been naughty and had been nice. Aunt Trudy, who lived in Wells, no more than 40 miles from Rosewood. God, please, send him by Coast Road," Kendall said, reaching for the picture. Was it his imagination, or the headlights farther apart now, as if the car were actually moving before his eyes? But stealthily, the way the minute hand moved on a pocket watch, "Send him by the Coast Road, please." He tore the picture off the wall and ran back in the living room with it. The screen was in a place before the fireplace, of course. It'd be at least 2 months before fire was wanted in here. Kendall batted it aside and threw the painting in, breaking glass, fronting, which he'd already broken once, at the gray service area against the fire dogs. Then he pelted for the kitchen, wondering what he would do if it didn't work either. It has to, he thought. It will because it has to, and that's all there is to it. He opened the kitchen cabinet and pawed through them, spilling the oatmeal, spilling a canister of salt, spilling the vinegar. The bottle broke open on the counter and assaulted his nose and eyes with a high steam. Not there. What he wanted wasn't there. He raced into the pantry, looked behind the door. Nothing but a plastic bucket and an old cedar, and then on the shelf by the dryer. There it was, next to the briquettes. Lighter fluid. He grabbed it and ran back, glancing at the telephone on the wall as he hurried by. He wanted to stop, wanted to call Aunt Trudy. Credibility wasn't an issue with her. If her favorite nephew called and told her to get out of the house, to get out right now, she would do it. But what if the blonde kid followed her, chased her? And he would. Kendall knew he would. He hurried across the living room and stopped in front of the fireplace. Jesus, Jesus, no! The picture behind the splintered grass no longer showed oncoming headlights. Now it showed the grandam on a sharp curving piece of road that could only be the exit ramp. Moonlight shone like liquid satin on the car's dark flank. In the background was a water tower, and the words on it were easily readable in the moonlight. "Keep Maine green," they said. "Bring money." Hill didn't hit the picture with the first squeeze of lighter fluid. His hands were shaking badly, and the aromatic liquid simply ran down the unbroken part of the glass, blurred the road virus's back deck. He took a deep breath, aimed, and squeezed again. This time the lighter fluid squirted in a bit of a jagged hole made by one of the fire dogs, and ran down the picture, cutting down through the paint, making it run, turning a Goodyear-wide oval into a city teardrop. Gale took one of the ornamental matches from the jar on the mantel and struck it on the hearth, and poked it through the hole in the glass. The painting caught at once, fire billowing up and down across the Grand Dam and the water tower. The remaining glass in the frame turned black and broke outward in a shower of flaming pieces. Kendall crunched them under his sneakers, putting them out before they could set the rug on fire. He went to the phone and punched in Aunt Trudy's number, unaware that he was crying. On the third ring, his answering machine picked up. "Hello. I know it encourages burglars to say things like this, but I've gone to Kennebec and to watch the new Harrison Ford movie. If you intend to break in, please don't take my China pigs. If you want to leave a message, do so at the beep." Beep. Did you want any books? Yeah. Kendall waited and then kept his voice as steady as possible. He said, "It's Richie, Aunt Trudy. Call me when you get back, okay? No matter how late." He hung up, looked at the TV, then dialed Newswire again, this time punching in the main area code while the computers on the other end processed his order. He went back and used a poker to jab at the black and twisted thing in the fireplace. The stench was ghastly. It made the spilled vinegar smell like flower patch in comparison, but Kendall found he didn't mind. The picture was entirely gone, reduced to ash, and that made it worthwhile. What if it comes back again? "It won't," he said, putting the poker back and returning to the TV. "I'm sure it won't." But every time the news scroll started to recycle, he got up to check. The picture was just ashes on the hearth, and there was no word of elderly women being murdered in the little Saco Kennebunk area of the state. Kendall kept watching, almost expecting to see a Grand Dam moving at high speed crash into Kennebunk movie theater tonight, killing at least 10, but nothing of the sort showed up. At a quarter of 11, the telephone rang. Kendall snatched it up. "Hello? It's Trudy, dear. Are you all right?" "Yes, fine." "You don't sound fine. Your voice sounds trembly and funny. What's wrong? What is it?" And then, chilling him, but not really surprising him, "It's that picture you're so pleased with, isn't it? That goddamn picture." It calmed him somehow that she should guess so much, and of course there was a relief of knowing she was safe. "Well, maybe. I had the heebie-jeebies all the way back here, so I burned it in the fireplace." "She's gonna find out about Judy in a minute, you know," a voice inside warned. "She doesn't have a $20,000 satellite hookup, but she does subscribe to Union Leader, and this will be on the front page. She'll put two and two together. She's far from stupid." Yes, that was undoubtedly true, but further explanations could wait until the morning, when he might be a little less free, when he might have found a way to think about the road virus without losing his mind, and when he'd begun to be sure it was really over. "Good," she said emphatically. "You ought to scatter the ashes, too." She paused and then spoke again. Her voice was lower. "You were worried about me, weren't you? Because you showed it to me." "A little, yes. Do you feel better now?" He leaned back and closed his eyes. It was true. He did. "Uh-huh. How was the movie?" "Good. Harrison Ford looks wonderful in uniform. Now if he just give her that little bump on his chin." "Good night, Aunt Judy. We'll talk tomorrow." "Will we?" "Yes," he said. "I think so." He hung up, went over to the fireplace again, and stirred the ashes of the poker. He could see a scrap of fender and a ragged little flap of road, but that was it. Fire was what it had needed all along, apparently. Wasn't that how you usually kill supernatural emissaries of evil? Of course it was. He used it a few times himself, most notably in The Departing, his a haunted train station novel. "Yes, indeed," he said. Burn, baby, burn." Thought about getting the drink he promised himself, then remembered the spilled bottle of vinegar, which by now would have probably be soaking the spilled oatmeal, one have thought. He decided he would simply go on upstairs instead. In the book one by Richard Kinnell, for instance, sleep would be out of the question after the sort of thing which had just happened to him. In real life, he thought he might sleep just fine. He actually dozed off in the shower, leaning back against the back wall with his hair full of shampoo and the water beating on his chest. He was at the yard sale again, and the TV standing on the paper ashtrays was broadcasting Judy Dement. Her head was back on, but Kendall could see the medical examiner's primitive industrial stitchwork. It circled her throat like a grisly necklace. "Now this New England Newswire update," she said, and Kendall, who'd always been a vivid dreamer, could actually see the stitches on her neck stretch and relax as she spoke. "Bobby Hastings took all his paintings and burned them, including yours, Mr. Kendall, and it is yours, as I'm sure you know. All sales are final. You saw the sign. Why don't you just ought to be glad I took your check?" Burned all his paintings? Yes, of course he did, Kendall thought in a watery dream. Couldn't stand what was happening to him. That was what the note said, and when you get to that point in the festivities, you don't pause to see if you want to accept one special piece of work from the bonfire. It's just that you get something special in the road virus head north, didn't you, Bobby? And probably completely by accident. You were talented. I can see that right away, but talent has nothing to do with what's going on in that picture. Some things are just good at survival, Judy Mint said on TV. They keep coming back no matter how hard you try to get rid of them. They keep coming back like viruses. Kendall reached out and changed the channel, but apparently there was nothing on all the way around the dial except for the Judy Dement show. When I say he opened a hole in the basement of the universe, she was saying now. Bobby Hastings, I mean. And this is what drove out. Nice, isn't it? Kendall's feet slid then, not enough to go out from underneath him completely, but enough to snap him to. He opened his eyes, winced at the immediate sting of the soap. Pearl had run down his face in thick white rivulets where he had been dozing, and kept his hands under the shower spray to splash it away. He did this once and was reaching out to do it again when he heard something. A ragged, rumbling sound. Don't be stupid, he told himself. All you hear is the shower. The rest is only imagination. Except it wasn't. Kendall reached out and turned off the water. The rumbling sound continued, low and powerful, coming from outside. He got out of the shower and walked, dripping across his bedroom on the second floor. There was still no shampoo in his hair to make him look like he turned white while he was dozing as if his dreams of Judy Dement had turned it white. Did I ever stop at a yard sale? He asked himself, but for this he had no answer. He supposed no one ever did. The rumbling sound grew louder as he approached the window overlooking the driveway that glimmered in the summer. Moonlight, like something of an Alfred Noyes poem. As he brushed aside the curtain and looked out, he found himself thinking of his ex-wife Sally, whom he had met at the World Fantasy Convention in 1978. Sally, who now published two magazines out of her trailer home, one called Survivors, one called Visitors, looked down at the driveway. These two tides came together in Kendall's mind like a double image in a stereopticon. He had a visitor who was definitely a survivor. Grand Am idled in front of the house, the white haze from its twin chrome tailpipes rising in the still night air. The old English letters on the back deck were perfectly readable. The driver's side door stood open, and that wasn't all. The light spilling down the porch steps suggested that Kendall's front door was also open. Forgot to lock it, Kendall thought, wiping soap off his forehead with a hand he could no longer feel. Forgot to reset the burglar alarm, too. Not that it'd make much difference to this guy. Well, he might have caused it to detour around Aunt Trudy, and that was something, but just now that thought brought him no comfort. Survivors. The soft rumble of the big engine, probably at least 442 with a four-barrel carb, reground valves, fuel injection. Turned slowly on legs that lost all feeling, a naked man with a head full of soap, and saw the picture over his bed, just as he'd known he would. In it, the Grand Am stood in his driveway with the driver's door open and two plumes of exhaust rising from the chrome tailpipes. From this angle, he could also see his own front door standing open and a long man-shaped shadow stretching down the hall. Survivors. Survivors and visitors. Now he could hear feet ascending the stairs. It was a heavy tread, and he knew, without having to see, that the blonde kid was wearing motorcycle boots. People with death before dishonor tattooed on their arms always wore motorcycle boots just as they always smoked unfiltered camels. These things were like a national law. And the knife. He'd be carrying a long, sharp knife, more of a machete actually, the sort of knife that could strike off a person's head in a single sweeping throw. And he'd be grinning, showing his filed cannibal teeth. Gil knew these things. He was an imaginative guy, after all. He didn't need anyone to draw him a picture. No, he whispered, suddenly conscious of his global nakedness, suddenly freezing all the way around his skin. No, please go away. But the footfalls kept coming. Of course they did. You couldn't tell a guy like this to go away. It didn't work. It wasn't the way the story was supposed to end. Kendall could hear him nearing the top of the stairs. Outside the Grand Am went on rumbling in the moonlight. Feet coming down the hall now, worn boot heels rapping on polished hardwood. Terrible paralysis had gripped Kendall. He threw it off with an effort, bolted down the bedroom door, wanting to lock it before the thing could get in here. But he slipped in a puddle of soapy water, and this time he did go down, flat on his back on the oak planks. And what he saw as the door clicked open and the motorcycle boots crossed the room towards where he lay, naked with his hair full of prell, was a picture hanging on the wall over his bed. A picture of the road virus idling in front of his house with the driver's side door open. The driver's side bucket seat, he saw, was full of blood. I'm going outside, I think, Kendall thought, and closed his eyes. That canvas had a killer drive, didn't it? Watch what you hang on your walls, kiddies.